All right, welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today I'm joined by Matt Hylom. Matt, how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I was wondering, just to get started, about your last name. I looked it up online. It said 50% chance origin Ethiopia, 50% was Sweden. And you mentioned you have like Cuban Spanish heritage, so I was very confused.
Yes. Hylom is it's actually a stage name,
Uh,
and it's short for hylomorphism, which
oh,
is a the concept from Aristotle of soul and matter
yeah,
being, yeah, that kind of union of body and soul.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's funny, it's also a name like there's people.
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
That's awesome. You very briefly mentioned you have like about eight siblings, is it?
Yeah.
Eight siblings. That's something I want to ask about. Before we do any of that, you mentioned a lot of your story at Christian's channel. You can give a brief introduction here. You don't have to rehash everything, but just so that people that haven't watched those conversations get an idea of who
Sure.
you are and what you're about. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a singer-songwriter, producer, um, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And I kind of have two branches of how I do music these days. And so one part is I run a company called Morning Light Music, and I sell and license my library of kind of background music to creators, people who advertise using commercials, or just simple like Instagram posts and need background music. People license my music through my own site. Um, and so that's kind of the business aspect of my music. And then on the artistic side, um, I just put out an album in June, called The Frame, which is kind of a compilation of a couple of songs I've released over the last couple of years. I wanted to do that in like one piece, but I just couldn't find the time to do it all at once because of running the business and kind of starting that up, the Morning Light Music side. So it kind of came out little piecemeal over the couple of years. So I finally had enough to put it together and put it out this year. And so that's kind of where the artistic side is at right now.
Cool. Yeah, so the music you make and that you sell, is that people just buy like individual songs through your company or what's the idea there?
It used to be like that, but now it's subscription based.
Okay.
So it's like either monthly, yearly, or a lifetime fee, and you get access to the library,
Yeah.
for whatever usage. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mentioned that's why I listened to the conversation with Christian
Hmm.
and he noticed this pattern of like you figured out the organizational stuff, the left brain stuff, uh,
Hmm.
starting the artist journey, and that's I think quite a rare thing. I think people usually get to that later on, whereas you seem to have like paved a path for yourself that was like steady to walk on before you started to dance in the water. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. That may just be my personality. I'm high in conscientiousness. So, um, and I also had like the pressure of wanting to provide for my family and
Mhm.
the fact that my family did exist already. So there was a lot of external pressures that were like, this is kind of priority first. And then from there, I started building out artistically.
So that's quite a rare thing. I think a lot of people that come into, let's say, this space, Jordan Peterson, big influence on you as well.
Hmm.
They're like, okay, let me now fix my life. And you seem to, you already had a family. Is that like, did that all happen very naturally? Did you feel a call to responsibility at a young age? Is this a personality thing? How do I understand that in your case?
I think I would definitely, I don't think my life was sorted. Even though if I did make what seemingly on the surface was like the right choices, get
Yeah.
married young, go to
Yeah.
college, etc. Um, I always tell young couples this too. It's like you don't really know what you're getting yourself into until you do it. So like on the surface, it's like, yeah, I know these things propositionally that I should do. You know, I should marry the woman I'm with. I should have kids. I should raise a family. But then the rubber meets the road of like you as a person now existing and having to stay up at 3 in the morning with your infant, and then the struggles you have with your wife and your personality clashes, like all of that wasn't sorted just because I had it propositionally.
Yeah.
So I still had that mess to deal with. Um, and actually coming across Peterson in 2016 um, really helped frame a lot for me uh, in terms of how to sort all of the things like my marriage, my relationship with my kids, my relationship with my family, and then the business venture I wanted to do, the artistic expression I wanted to have. All of that had to fit so that one thing wasn't competing for the other. Um, and yeah, I feel like running into Peterson at the right time was like providential.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people was like, when I started to run across Jordan Peterson, everything got better. People's part
Yeah, for
were
sure.
quite grateful to him.
Hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So what is it like growing up with eight siblings? I grew up with five, so I have somewhat of an idea, but this
Yeah.
sounds like another level.
Where are you in the ranking of your siblings? Are you the oldest or
I'm the fourth of
okay?
six. Yeah. What about you?
Okay. I am the second oldest.
Oh yeah.
Um, it's it's a mess, but it's a good mess. Kind of like family life in general.
Yeah.
It's like organized chaos.
Mm.
But yeah, I wouldn't trade it for the world. Um, it definitely feels, at least in the family I grew up in, very close Spanish family. It feels like a kind of externalized consciousness
Yep.
that your siblings have with you, as
Mm.
close as we were, that they were like parts of yourself that would tell you to do something are like almost embodied into different siblings, and they would call you out on things, and they helped you form who you are. And then moving away, having to individualize and figure out who you are for yourself, and then coming back to the family as a whole person was definitely a process. Yeah, I don't know if you saw that movie from Pixar. I don't, it was a Pixar or Disney, Encanto.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Good.
that's basically the story of my family and all of the dynamics of the kind of like close knit family that's maybe a little too close, and then having to individualize and then
Yeah.
come back to the family with their particular traits. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you feel a need to like get away from that's something I felt at least when I was 18. I was like, I need to get away and take some time for myself. Like you say, individualize. That's something, it's like a pull you felt as well.
I think so. Yeah, I yeah, maybe not. It didn't come out in like a geographical sense where I moved away. I still am close with my family. Like we live basically 30 minutes from it,
Yeah,
all of each other. Um,
that's awesome.
but yeah, the need to even like at a psychological level do that for sure was definitely there. Of
Mhm.
like sometimes you buck the system just because you want to buck the system. And
Yeah.
it's not like, your parents say do this, or like this is how we did it as a family. You should raise your kids this way, and you pick the opposite just because.
Yeah.
And so there, in the beginning, there was a lot of that where it's like I just want to make my own decisions, and then having to come full circle, realizing that I could make my own decision, and it could also be aligned with how I was raised and what my parents did, and those two things can coexist, and that's like a maturity.
Yeah.
Yeah, or that is different. Like there's nuance there. It's every decision is going to be different.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How do you notice like the differences in your siblings? Because to me, in my family, the older we've gotten, the more I see like, okay, these are their own people. Like they're so different in so many ways, especially personality wise.
Hmm.
How is that with you guys?
Yeah, we're all super different. It's funny because people on the outside will say that we're all like the same,
Yeah, I noticed.
but on the inside, you're like,
Yeah.
no, we're not. Like you guys all look the same too. It's like we look totally different. I don't know what you're
Hmm.
talking about. So I think from the inside, you're always going to see the minutia of the difference, the differences in personality and opinions and ways of living. But uh, yeah, if you kind of like step back and kind of like look at it blurry, you kind of see like a coherent body there
Yeah.
that it's like there is something that's connecting us all, but the way it expresses itself is very unique and different.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of family in Cuba or Spain still?
I do, but I don't know.
Hmm.
Like I'm not close with them. Like that's my grandparents came here to the U.S. and then my parents. So my parents would know them more than
Yeah.
I do. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Most of my family's either in New York, Florida, or here in North Carolina.
Yeah. I had a I was in Italy for about a month and I had a roommate. He was Cuban Spanish as well. And he
Oh
only
wow.
spoke Spanish and I had a basis of Spanish, but with him I had to like fully speak Spanish for a month. So I'm
Hmm.
very like he helped me a
Nice.
lot. He helped me a lot with
That's
that.
awesome.
Um,
Yeah,
but
full immersion.
yeah, yeah, full immersion. That's what it felt like.
Mhm.
I think that's really good.
Uh-huh.
I was gonna say it's wild that you guys are still so close to each other. I mean, America's so big. Like even with us, I live
Yeah.
in the Netherlands. It's a small country, but still we managed to like get away from each other like at least an
Hmm.
hour and a half. So that's
That's funny.
I think
Yeah.
it's a good sign.
Yeah, it
Um,
definitely comes from the Spanishness
yeah,
as opposed to kind of the American culture where there's a little bit more like kind of go wherever, whatever happens. There's a little bit more of an undertone of like you guys should stay close. There should be
yeah,
like multi-generational families where grandparents live with the parents and the kids and all that. So that culture definitely bled into the way we kind of are settling around here.
yeah. You grew up Catholic as well, and
Yep.
is that something that you ever struggled a lot with? Like to me, I grew up Protestant, so it didn't feel as like I didn't even know about denominations, for example. And then growing up, I'm just like I see options, whereas other people I think is like this is identity, and I'm
Mm.
trying to like struggle between the two of like identity and like option or whatever term you want to put to it. How is that? How has that been for you, and how is it now?
Um, Catholicism is definitely uh, it definitely is part of my identity, and more so because it was a cultural,
Mm,
coming from a Spanish family, and then New York, like up in the Northeast, everybody's Catholic of some sort, even if it's quote like just culturally Catholic and they don't even practice. Um, so I grew up in an environment where that was kind of the norm, and then we moved down to North Carolina in like 2003, and so we were in like the Bible Belt where it was mostly Protestant,
yeah,
and I felt like that really um, put me on the defense of having to like understand why I believe what I believe in
yeah,
contrast to Protestantism.
yeah.
Um, so I did a little bit of like deep diving into apologetics in my early teens, and then recently, I feel like in the last decade or so, it's been more like Christianity versus the world.
Mm,
So it's like instead of like the nitty gritty, like Catholic versus Protestant, the bigger questions are coming like Christianity or even a religious sense versus
yeah,
secularism. And so like the bigger questions are being asked and people are having to go deeper and deeper to ask more fundamental questions. Um, and so I've just kind of been on a journey of coming from something that was like culturally Catholic and you kind of don't really ask why to then
yeah,
like being immersed into a Protestant culture and having to figure out what I believe and then things feeling more and more secular as I grew older and older and having to keep asking those questions to make sure I'm like on stable ground.
yeah. Yeah, I recognize a lot of that. My country's mostly, I think it's mostly secular if you ask people. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's churches everywhere, but like they're running empty these days.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I felt that I don't know defense mechanism so much. I think I just gave up when I was a kid. I was like, I don't even want to argue, and so it just turned me into
Sure.
not like explicitly atheistic, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel connected with it, and now I feel more of this sense of like yeah, the religious sense versus the secular in terms
Mm-hmm.
of the conversations I have. Because sometimes I'll speak to someone and they'll hash out like they'll speak about denominations and this and that, and I'm like, I'm not able to even think about those things. Like they're too
Yeah.
weeds for me to even think about. I know other people think about them and it's good, but um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that the larger return to something is more important to me as well.
Yeah, I kind of get a little bogged down by that as well. Even within Catholicism, there are like subgroups of people debating about which, you know, liturgy is the best and
Mm.
all that. It just gets so political. And I know there's a space for that, but like I'm not a theologian. So I'm not going to solve these problems. I'm not going to, I'm not going to unite the Orthodox and the Catholics together. Like
Yeah,
let them figure out the filioque. Like
yeah,
it's kind of it interests me on some level, but then after a while, it's like if this is kind of getting in the way of a deeper conversation, then you know I kind
yeah.
of bypass that.
Yeah, listening to you now saying that, I think I liked a lot about you in the conversation with Christian is that you have this discernment that you apply a lot to your life, where you're like, I know, especially as an artist, you try to discern whether or not something is serving the good. Um,
Mm.
I don't know. I think it would be very helpful for people listening, especially people that are like more artistic, to tell them how you apply this discernment, how it works exactly. Like how does it help you balance, for example, family life and being an artist?
Mm. Well, yeah, I think the thing that you're trying to get at is like what Mathieu Peugeot calls rumination, uh, of just being able to like chew on something and see and like extract the proper information from it in order to have the right footing and then see how it fits in your life. Uh, but you have to have like a guiding ethic, I think, like a guiding framework in which to put all these things. I don't know if you can just I see it the way I see it is that my connection to my prayer life and my faith is what gives me the sorting mechanism
Yeah,
to 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 build the hierarchies of all of my wants, my necessities, all my desires. Um, and it's only through that that I can actually make sense of the world. Otherwise, it's like John Vervaeke would say combinatorial explosion. That there's an endless possibilities of how you can combine all the things and decisions you have to make, but you need some sort of like guiding filter almost to sort these things. Um, and then on an individual basis, you have to go into the quiet to hear the still voice, um, with the particular thing you're trying to discern, and see if like for an example, I'll give a concrete example of like my uh my decision to pursue music. I had to sort the possibilities that this could be coming from a place of pride, a place of like wanting fame and attention, wanting wealth, or avoiding responsibility, meeting me wanting to just escape and be creative and not have anything tied down to reality. So all of these possibilities of what could be motivating me to express myself artistically and to really pursue this, I just had to take into the quiet over a long period of time and discern, like look at myself and look at my motivations and see how I respond to other aspects of my life and see you kind of the way Peterson would say burn off the dead wood
yeah.
to see what's left when you can kind of extract all of that. Yeah. And then in the end, like some people would say that if you do that, more than likely you won't end up pursuing something like music because you'll realize it's just fame or it's just fortune. And it's like maybe that's how much deadwood you have on, and that's a problem. So it's a good thing you burned it off and realized that that's not something you should pursue. But for me, there was still something standing when I burned it off. That's like, oh, there's a genuine pursuit of interest. There's something that I like can't not do in this music creation that's not like connected to these vicious desires. And so that's the process of discernment. And then I kind of move forward in faith through that.
No, it's beautiful. I I think for a lot of people it's difficult to tell, even when you're praying, of like, am I really, getting the right message here? And then I spoke to
Yeah.
this guy for a while on the podcast as well. I don't know, I met him through Twitter or something. And he was an atheist, and we just had like a bunch of it was a productive discussion, but we were talking about morality. And he was like, he said, I basically think I can discern right from wrong. And when he said it, I was like, I know that there's something wrong with it, but also there's something right about it. Like we do need to
Mm-hmm.
have people who are well guided to be like, this is a good thing, this is a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That there's a sense of that guiding aspect to it. that I think can be a fine line,
For
um,
sure.
and difficult. It's difficult to discern.
Yeah, I it does seem like there's a tendency on the religious side to kind of let go of the responsibility of your choices and say like,
Yeah,
oh, God told me I should pursue music. Like that's kind of like a blunt tool to kind of frame that decision. And so it's something more like a kind of I don't know. It's really hard to describe
yeah,
the way that the nuances of like you actually having the responsibility to make the choice. That God wants you to be free in that choice, but then and then there's on the other hand, there's also this calling that happens. Um, yeah, it's one of those things that you know when you know.
yeah,
But yeah, I do see a lot often, and it kind of irks me a little bit when people paint too broadly and will say things like, "Yeah, Jesus told me I have to do this," and it's like, did he really, or are you kind of masking your own intent and
yeah.
through a religious guise?
Mhm. I like to speak a bit more about your music because I think that's uh only fair, and I've listened to quite a
Sure.
bit of it, and I'm like, I'm kind of a fan. I really like, and
Uh-huh.
I honestly
Thank
say
you.
like I really like your music. I'm speaking to another artist tomorrow. He's he's a composer, so he does like kind of cinematic covers, and he makes some cinematic music
Nice.
himself. Predominantly, I listen to that type of stuff, and then I
Hmm.
listen to a lot of actually some people you mentioned like Kanye. I listen to still
Hmm.
a lot of his old stuff. Um, you mentioned Phineas. I think that's the producer
Yeah.
of Billie Eilish. So I
Hmm.
really like Billie Eilish actually. I know she's like very mainstream type of artist, but I
Yeah.
um enjoy her music as well. Yeah, so for people that are completely unaware of your music, how would you describe it yourself? Because I find it difficult to put words to it.
Um, it's kind of eclectic mix of pop, hip hop, electronic, acoustic, beat heavy.
Yeah,
I mean that like yeah. When I have to submit these songs for distribution, I categorize them as pop because it's kind of the catch-all
yeah,
phrase or genre.
yeah,
But yeah, it's kind of a genre blending medium. Yeah, it's not really. It's hard to describe.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I know what you mean. It's most
Billie
of my
Eilish is a good like popular point. Or like the way
yeah,
Phineas produces, like there's a blend of a lot of things. And
yeah,
so if I say Billie Eilish, it kind of gives you a rough like, oh, okay, so that, sometimes it's jazz, sometimes it's dark, sometimes it's upbeat.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about going fully into one thing like what's her name? Rosalia, the artist from I'm not sure. I think she's Spanish. She's someone that like she learned different um let's say styles. So she started her career
Mhm.
being like flamenco, and she learned to sing flamenco, and then she did like different types of things. And
Interesting.
now she seems to have a lot of those different types of genres as well. Um, I I wonder throughout your life, is it like did you pick up different styles bit by bit, or was it more like everything came together as you started producing music? Um,
It definitely came all at once. Like my dad has a pretty um wide variety of music that he likes, and so he was always playing some sort of 80s disco, but then also Gypsy Kings and flamenco. Uh, and so I kind of, I was a kid of my age, so I, listened to top 40 radio, but then mixed in with all of the stuff my dad kind of brought to the table.
yeah,
So it kind of just had, I was definitely a petri dish of just all those things at once.
that's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I love that. I'm very simple. People ask me like what kind of music you like, and it's like everything.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah. I think it
they'll
was John Paul II, who somebody asked him like what kind of music he likes, and he said good music.
yeah,
It's like, yeah, that's the best answer.
yeah. I saw this. And I noticed you mentioned Rick Rubin on
Hmm.
Christians. I actually listening to his podcast for me was very helpful
Mm.
because that was the first podcast I listened to in years where I was like, okay, this is getting me. It's furthering my thinking finally again because it's
Yeah.
like there's people that think so differently. Um, And I know, did you read his book, right?
Yeah, The Creative Act.
I haven't read it, but
Yeah,
I heard interesting things
yeah,
about it.
it's good. Yeah,
Cool.
it's definitely if you like his podcast, it's definitely worth
Yeah,
listening to. I heard it on audiobook, so it was like 6 or 7 hours, pretty
cool.
easy.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I love his podcast. I love like hearing artists speak for just 2 hours. I think
hmm
that's really cool. And I saw this clip of his, like, what instrument do you play? Like the interviewer asked him, and he's like, I don't play anything. He's like,
Yeah.
his quality is basically like,
Yeah.
he says, I know what I like. That's all.
hmm
I thought that
hmm
was really cool because he, like,
Yeah.
if you look at the stuff he produced, it's so different. Uh, and I
Yeah.
think there's a real beauty to it, that he's kind of figured out a meta thing behind music that's allowed him to be so
For
successful.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. That definitely comes through.
Yeah. Um, Maybe a weird question. Do you have a favorite Disney movie?
Uh, Favorite Disney movie?
Disney,
It's got to be one of
Pixar?
the. It's got to be one of the older ones. Um, Lion King
I,
is. I like that one a lot. Um, on the newer Pixar front, I really like The Incredibles.
I,
Uh, the first one, yeah, just the as a father,
yeah,
the kind of sub story there. That one and Finding Nemo, both kind of concentrating on the father's arc,
yeah,
is really interesting to me. Like in Finding Nemo, Merlin having to like let go and allow his son to be, and
yeah,
then Mr. Incredible on from The Incredibles having to like realize that no man is an island and he needs his family in order to like function.
yeah,
It just reminded me of my own like musical pursuits and this like highfalutin like pursuit of something else, and maybe there's a tendency to leave the family behind, but then you realize that it's kind of essential to your existence. And
yeah,
yeah, I was like, whoa, that's amazing.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
watched Finding Nemo for the first time. Well, for the first time as like an adult recently.
Uh-huh.
And the start is like he loses his wife and just like
Yeah. Crazy.
all the fish
Yeah.
die, or like the potential
Yeah.
fish. And there's
Uh-huh.
it's dark. It's a really dark
Yeah.
premise. And
Yeah.
kids just watch it. I think
Yeah. I know. It's heavy.
it's heavy. I think it's good though that that's a kids movie.
hmm
Um,
For sure.
and then Lion King, I think I would still say is my favorite. Just before this conversation, I was looking through the list because
hmm
I've always said Lion King, but I've watched a lot of the old ones now since, and I think it still is Lion King, but I think that's because it appeals to like the phase of life that I've been in, um,
hmm
early 20s still,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think it makes sense that it shifts along the years. I found
Yeah.
that to
Yeah.
be Yeah, go ahead.
Lion King, there's so many archetypes in there. Obviously, Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot,
Yeah,
but it's so heavy. It's almost like it's like so deep in its mythos. Uh, I love how it's really just a portrayal of like the proper virtue of courage,
yeah,
and that you have you have Simba at first being rash, and then his father telling him, "I'm only courageous when I have to be." It's
yeah,
like you don't just go off and do um, rash things because that's your idea of what courage is. And then on the opposite side, his father dies and he flees off with Timon and Pumbaa, who are like escape the world. And so he's now like on the opposite extreme of cowardliness. So he's got the two extremes of the vice of courage, and it takes both his like Beatrice to like call him back to his purpose, and then his father reminding him of who he is, which is like that the whole Platonic idea of anamnesis, of this kind of remembrance, to remember your dismembered parts in order to like become the king. It's just like amazing. Like just as a concept is like I could watch that a million times.
yeah, yeah. It's insane that these movies have come together and like they're
Yeah.
that layered. I heard Jonathan Peugeot say that like these movies are basically as close as it gets to Bible stories.
hmm
Uh, but then they're there with the visuals and the music, and it's like
Right.
it's for
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
Like it's really
Right.
And
Right.
I would like colleagues with, a tattoo of like Hakuna Matata, and I'm like
Mhm.
kind of missing the point there.
Right, right, right. How about remember who you are?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean
exactly.
that's actually one of the the words at Mass in the Catholic Mass over the bread, the priest says the words of consecration. He says, "Do this in remembrance of me," which is from Christ saying that at the Last Supper.
Yeah.
And there's a connection there, that kind of anamnesis of like Christ is remembering the church from its dismembered self. Like our dismemberment into sin is
Yeah.
now remembered through Christ. And
Yeah.
that's like all there. Like it's there in an archetypal sense in the Lion King. It's just like, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So I heard you mention that you have a brother and a sister who both were helpful for you in terms of the
Hmm.
things that you read. I have a similar brother, philosophy teacher.
Oh,
Like,
nice.
yeah,
Yep,
it's like they paved the way for you, and you can just like
for sure.
pick up what they
Absolutely.
did. Uh,
Yep,
if you can share, can you tell me a bit about what they do and what they like focus on in terms of
sure.
endeavors? Yeah.
Yeah, my older brother, he's about 2 years older than me. He is a Catholic priest. So I basically just stayed in conversation with him through his education, through seminary, and then into his priesthood, and just kind of absorbed everything that he would be interested in. So he's a huge fan of um, classic literature, especially Dante, and so his love of literature kind of bled out to me and was like my source of like why I should be interested in these kind of things.
Mm.
Um, and so he's still doing that. He's actually going to be publishing a trilogy of a fiction work that he's working on, coming out next year. But yeah, he's just a really deep mind and I unending source of what should I read next? Tell me
Yeah.
about this. I want to pick your brain about this. But we're still doing that. I just did that
Amazing.
yesterday. And then my sister is philosophy teacher at the school here in North Carolina, Belmont Abbey College. So she also, went to school for her PhD multiple years, however many years she was in school. And same thing, just I was following her along of like, what are you reading? What are you into? Tell me about this. Tell me about that. And now that she's here locally teaching in the school, we still stay in touch and same thing, same unending source of um, good reference points of like, tell me what to read.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's really nice. How did you do in school actually? How was that for you? Just high school.
Um, I did pretty good. I was a pretty good student. Definitely like leaned on my interests.
Mm.
And so like I excelled in math and I was like really good at math. And that gave me like an average SAT score because I was really good at math and like I sucked at reading and writing. And so like averaged out. But and then I went to school for exercise science. My kind of projected idea was I was going to be a physical therapist.
Hmm.
Um, and I did okay. Yeah, it was like average in school, but I enjoyed it because I had interests that I was pursuing.
Yeah.
Um, but never really expanded my education to like beyond the practicality. It was very like we're going to learn the sciences. This is for your career.
Yeah.
So all of the education that I have outside of that, reading classic literature and the great books and philosophy, theology, all of that's like of my own accord
Mm.
from my siblings and recommendations and just kind of going down the rabbit hole of these things.
It's interesting that you didn't like excel at reading then, and then now you like consume these
Yeah, strange.
really difficult
Yeah,
books
yeah,
on your own behalf.
yeah. I feel like I was missing out.
Mm.
Like now that I'm reading these books, I was like, man, I wish I was like I read Beowulf in high school
Yeah.
and like I didn't understand it. I thought it was trash. Like I was like, what? I don't get it. Like I just don't understand what's happening. Um, I read Lord of the Rings early on, and I was like, I don't get the book. I was just really bad at reading. Like my comprehension was really low.
I see.
Um, but I was really good at math, so that's kind of how it worked out for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not like that. I basically I think I was average at mathematics, very bad at physics, like all that stuff was just
Hmm.
Chinese to me. Also
Mhm.
very bad at Chinese. Did that for 2 weeks. Teacher was like, what are you doing here?
That's
This is
funny.
like elective. My dad was like, you can do that elective class, do it.
Uh-huh.
So she threw me out.
That's hilarious.
Uh, but yeah, also reading, like sometimes I look back on like essays I wrote in high school and I'm like, how this is like a 13-year-old. Like I can like
Oof.
I actually not
Yeah.
believe because I never read. Like I think that the school system here at least 30 years ago you'd have to have read like 50 books perfectly,
Hmm.
French books, German books, everything, and now you can get away with reading a summary on Spark
Right.
and you
Right.
can pass the test, and that's like
Yeah.
that's it. So I had a similar thing of like I got really into reading, but after um to the point of
Hmm.
like how on earth did I did I manage?
Uh-huh.
But that's interesting. How were you in school? Like were you a happy kid? How did that go for you? Like
Yeah, I was pretty happy. Um, the the move from North Carolina, from New York to North Carolina was
yeah.
a little bit traumatic in that I was like 13. And
Ah,
so
yeah.
I was like,
Terrible.
I'm also like really introverted.
Yeah.
So uh it took me 13 years to make friends.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So like I just started having like my my people and like driving with them, and we were about to all go into our teen years, and
Yeah.
I got like sucked out of it and
Yeah.
like thrown into the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anybody, and so I really had no interest in making new friends, and so it took me like 3 years to get acclimated. So that period between 13 and 16, yeah, it was kind of dark, not like, in a dramatic sense, but it
Yeah.
was lonely for
Yeah.
sure. And it affected my school and my interests. And so I mean it made me and my siblings closer. I feel like we benefited that from that. It was like uh diamonds under pressure kind of thing.
Mm.
But but yeah, it definitely, it was a bit of a stumbling block that I feel like, turned out to be, we always say that that my oldest brother, me and my sister kind of had it the worst because we were the ones that were most connected in New
Yeah.
York.
Yeah.
And then but then we ended up turning out really weird, and we kind of attribute it to that. It was like, well, that that probably, all of this probably wouldn't have happened if we didn't move. So it
Yeah.
turned out okay in the end.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit more about your personality if you're willing. I always find that really fun to
Yeah.
go through. You mentioned you were high
Um
conscientiousness.
yes. You're familiar with the Peterson's Big
Yeah.
Five test.
Yeah.
Um so I am high in agreeableness.
Yep. How
Let me see
high?
if I can pull up my 85.
Oh, wow.
Um,
That's rare.
and so you know how Peterson's chart kind of breaks down into two other
Yeah.
categories.
Yeah.
So I'm really high in compassion, which is like
Okay.
93 percentile, and then like average in politeness, 58th
Cool, cool.
percentile. Yeah, so it seems like I'm really agreeable, but I'm just really compassionate and then not as polite. um,
Cool.
and then in the conscientiousness is like 95 percentile.
Yeah.
Um, and extroversion is 77th percentile, which
Hmm.
again, that breaks down into low enthusiasm, like 41 percentile, but then high in assertiveness, 92 percentile.
Yeah, I have similar.
Um, yeah. And then neuroticism is 10%,
Hmm.
4% volatility, 27% withdrawal.
Yeah.
And then intellect, openness to experience is 97th percentile.
Whoa, cool.
Yeah.
That's an awesome score, man. That's like
I mean, I can't be proud of it. It's what I am.
no, but I spoke to Paul Vanderkly about his, and he's like, yeah, I hit the personality lottery, and I
Oh,
think
that's funny.
you got a similar deal going on. But
That's funny.
Paul is zero politeness or something like that. So
That's hilarious.
that's cool. Like, let me think about this enthusiasm. Yeah, I have low enthusiasm as well. It can be like
Uh-huh.
people can get annoyed by it. Like there'll be a
Yes.
surprise for me or something, and I'll just be very
Hmm.
chill, and they'll be like, "What? Why are you not?"
Yes. That's how I am. I always feel bad like during the holidays or Christmas time. Like my kids will give me a present. I'm like, thank you so much. It's so beautiful. But like that's like me at full enthusiasm. Like I love this so much. I'm gonna frame it, but it comes off like
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, exactly the same. And
Yeah.
the compassion, is that something that weighs heavy, or how does that manifest? Because my wife, for example, is also extremely high in this, and she just finds it difficult to not be affected by bad things happening to others, which
Mm.
is like you have access to so much because of the internet, for example. So that's
Yeah. I definitely have to filter things. Like I definitely don't like one of the reasons why I stay off social media for long periods of time is because my compassion will just like I'll get interested in what other people are going through and that'll like affect me.
yeah.
Um yeah, so it's definitely something I've had to like wrestle with. My wife is actually really low in compassion and so she has the opposite problem where she has to like understand where people are coming from, but that also has its like benefits in that if she has to, put the hammer down with our kids, like, she does it and there's no
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
bending there because like they don't get their way or whatever. Um so it's good kind of good. Me and my wife's personality kind of complement each other.
Hmm.
So we have some strengths and weaknesses that are opposite, but we kind of stay in conversation with those things and learn from each other, which has been like huge for us.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. That's also, I have a similar thing. I did like the linking
Oh
personality
yeah. Yeah, we do too.
before we got together, so that was really helpful.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it's still a framework through which I understand like a lot of things that are happening, uh,
Hmm. Yep.
which I think can be helpful to a degree, but sometimes I like overinterpret. And also like
Yeah.
I took it when I was 19, so I'm like maybe I should
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah, yeah.
probably get a clearer image if I would do it.
For sure.
Also with
Yeah.
people that hold me accountable of like, hey, it's not exactly who you are.
Right, right. Did you take Peterson has like a course associated with this?
Yeah.
Um, it's worth doing if you have time. Because he kind of explains how these scores like relate to you in the real world. And
Yeah.
um, I like how he talks about the scores as a kind of distribution curve,
Yeah.
as like this is the middle of where you're supposed to, where you more than likely will respond. So, like, my 85 percentile agreeableness is that's the middle of a distribution curve. So sometimes I might respond in the 92nd percentile
Yeah.
or respond in the 75th percentile. And it also opens the door up for um, growth as an individual.
I
That's
see.
like, this is not the line that you're going to be at. This is like the median of your distribution.
Yeah.
And so virtue would compel you to kind of average that out to know when to respond appropriately given the
Yeah.
situation.
So that's a
Yeah. So I
course.
felt like that was helpful. It's not like you are determined to be this way
Yeah.
and these are your results and now you can like blame your personality. It's still like this open question of like, are you going to change? Are you going to be better?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's funny. I think like it can very quickly become that for a lot of people, especially
Yeah.
if you're young. Like it's so easy to be like, this that. But it gets
Yeah.
really really ugly once you get a bit older. You get more
Hmm.
responsibility. I think there's a tendency, like in general, people that, or maybe not even personality, but if something bad happens to you, it can turn you resentful, and
Yeah.
it can be a very good explanation for your behavior. And I think there's a lot of that these days where it's like, yeah, of course, terrible upbringing and this and that. But, if everyone that was going through hard stuff was that resentful, the world would basically be a hell to live in. So I think
It's a,
it's a call to action, but, you know, it's
yeah,
definitely
it's
hitting
hard
people harder than others.
for sure. Yeah. It seems like it would, it would not be in the interest of the individual or society at large to say like, well, you suffered, so you get to be
Yeah.
resentful.
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't seem like it works out on the individual level or as an ethic broader,
Hmm.
and in a broader sense. Um, but even like with that said, it's like you can't. It's hard. It's hard to then like top down compel somebody to do X or Y or to see it differently without really being compassionate and understanding that like they are coming from a broken place and
Yeah.
having to climb back up. And so that's going to take work and it's going to take some give and take in their personality and their responses and their pursuit of virtue. Yeah, it's definitely messy. Like life is messy in
Yeah, for
general.
sure. I
Yeah.
think it's so fascinating how like everyone has their own little, but like every score will be different almost. That it's
Hmm.
like even if you have the same score on paper, there will still be small differences.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's something like as a kid I just wasn't aware of. Like I was like, yeah, this are these guys and those are that. And it's like everyone has these little differences that make them them. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I just think that's beautiful. I don't have really
Yeah.
anything to add to that. Um, you went to Symbolic World. This is
Yes.
something that like I could never go to because it's in the US, but I don't know
Yeah.
much about what happened there because I haven't watched much of the recap or anything. I think some stuff came out recently, some talks, but tell me
Uh-huh.
about your experience there and what motivated you to go.
Um, it was it's like 8 hours from me. It was in Florida.
Mm.
So when that came up, it seemed like a really good opportunity to meet some people who I had been in conversation with online. Um,
Wait, can I stop you?
and yeah,
Like 8 hours, as in it's not so much to drive.
correct.
It's
Yeah.
like for like Europeans, that's like 8 hours. Like, why
That's
would you?
across the entire continent.
I can see you. Yeah.
That's really funny. Yes. Um, yeah, that's hilarious. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, so uh, it was a good opportunity to see faces and meet people in person. Like I really like the in person aspect of things as opposed to uh, just constantly being blocked by technology.
Hmm.
Um, so it just worked out for my schedule. Ran it by my wife. I was like, "Can I do this?" Um, so it was good. I really enjoyed going. It was awesome seeing Peugeot and Peterson and all the speakers there and to hear their talks in person. It was kind of subgrouped where you had different tracks you could go to, like an artist track
Yeah.
or the symbolic history track, um, universal history. Uh, and so I was in the artist track, but yeah, really, really good stuff. Dirk Paul Robbins was there. Great, great talk and great performance. Um, yeah, it was just really cool to see it all in person. Like stuff I've been following Peterson and Peugeot for a while and watching all their videos. To actually see it in person felt like it was more embodied
Yeah.
and felt like a more realness to it.
Yeah. It's crazy when I saw Peterson live in Rotterdam and
Mm,
it was just really odd mostly like all these people coming up and I'm like, wow, these are people that probably also watch these lectures. And it's one thing to like
yeah,
have these Zoom conversations, which I've been having for a while, but meeting actually the people in real life,
yeah,
it's a crazy experience.
yeah.
Especially,
At first, I was like, "Isn't it going to just be the same thing? Like just seeing it's going to be like I'm watching a video that's just a lot bigger,
yeah,
but it's
yeah,
not. Like there's
it's
something
not.
that's like beyond the material that's inexplicable that you experience when you're there in person. It's like going to a concert versus listening to the music.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's true. I I I recently met these guys through my channel, which is really funny. Like that watched a talk with my brother, and
Hmm.
he mentioned that he was gonna like have a public talk at this closest university, whatever. And then they went to the talk, and they're like, "Yeah, we saw your
Oh, nice.
YouTube
That's
thing, and now
awesome.
we like became friends." And it's just super weird to be
That's
talking
cool.
about this. And they have like a podcast in Dutch about the meaning crisis.
Wow.
That's just like it's really cool to see.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Yeah, just seeing this materialize because it felt like such a I don't know. I would have to explain to people that I listen to this psychology, like to my wife for the longest time.
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, you have the psychologist guy, the orthodox guy,
Hmm.
and then she heard the
Yeah.
name John Vervaeke like a million times.
Uh-huh.
And so
Yeah, I have the same story.
they just like, how do I explain this to people? And now more and more people will actually know a lot of the names. And now it's getting to a weird point that it's almost like a mainstream type of thing. Like I remember
Mhm.
listening to Joe Rogan when I was like 17, 18. And now, he's almost like deciding. election, so everyone has an
Hmm.
idea of like Joe Rogan, and it's like
Yeah, yeah.
it's just weird to see all these, like especially just the podcast world coming to, yeah, to
Come
power
to
in a
life.
way.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's wild. It's really wild. I I think especially in the US, it's really a thing. Um,
Hmm.
but I like it as opposed to the short form type of thing. But I do still think that there's something off about this being so influential, let's say, or like
Mm.
anything being so influential. I think that's, yeah, it's just something that kind of, I feel like there's something that I should be worried about there, but I'm not sure. In general, with
Yeah.
technology, things moving so fast, you're like, of
Hmm.
course we're going too fast downhill for things to go well, but there's no way to stop. And if you stop it by force, it just gets 10 times worse. And it's like, how do you fare through that? Um,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. The podcast like explosion was interesting because it kind of came up at a time when things in advertising and the kind of common knowledge on YouTube was like short form.
Yeah.
Attention span is shrinking and people need information quick. And then like podcast was like, no, just kidding. 3 hour conversations
Yeah.
about the deepest things you could imagine. So it was kind of a surprise upon the culture. And it definitely was kind of an awakening to a growing hunger for the deeper questions that by their nature of the substance of the question required a longer answer, if you
Yeah.
want to call it like that. Even if it's a conversation with Joe Rogan and a person about something, whatever, aliens, like something
Yeah.
superficial, what they're really getting at is like, who is this person? And it takes 3 hours to kind of unpack the gestalt of the person.
Yeah.
Um, and so you're kind of poking around for that long until it kind of jumps. And so that's what people are looking for. They're looking for that Geist. Um, so yeah, that hunger was definitely apparent in the podcast emergence. And then, but like you said, now that's switching mainstream media. That doesn't necessarily. It still begs the question on whether podcasting itself as a medium can calcify and turn into something propagandistic and tyrannical, and it's just going to have the same technological problem that whatever it's replacing will have,
Yeah.
but just at a different at a different level. So it's like, you always got to keep your eyes peeled and be suspicious of these things. Like in-person interactions is always the best. That's how you can get the handshake and know if somebody's a real person. Anything else is always kind of a fake, kind of a garment of skin, as Peugeot would say.
Yeah. I love the way you speak, man. I love like that's normal nowadays to just use German words.
Yeah.
Like these are like words in my language, like
Yeah.
gestalt is like
Yeah.
gestalte in Dutch. And like
Uh-huh.
it's just wild that like this thing that Peugeot said is like 10 years ago, me and my brother felt like we were crazy. And now just
Hmm.
people on
Yeah.
the internet will just like know exactly what you're
Yeah.
speaking about.
Yeah, for sure. I actually that's kind of how I frame what Peugeot and Peterson and Vervaeke have kind of brought to the table. Um, and like my appreciation of them and their work is that they've added language
Yeah.
to the culture. Like they're like, here's a set of ideas or a set of words even that like bring these ideas together, like in a symbolic way. It's like here's gestalts, here's
Yeah.
like symbolic worldview, here's archetype. Like
Yeah.
these things obviously existed before them, but they're the ones carrying it into the era now. And so that's what I appreciate, that like I have the kind of vernacular now to be able to speak about things that I've been like, I don't know, it's out there
Yeah. Yeah.
somewhere. Like I can't talk
Yeah.
about it.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think like it's what a lot of people credit for Vaki to. Like he's bringing in like Greek,
Yeah. Hmm.
vocabulary, but
Yeah.
it's helping
Yeah.
express ideas that we didn't have before, and it's also respecting the listener of like, hey, I think you're gonna
Hmm.
be able to understand this. Um,
Right. Right.
Whereas there's been a tendency more and more throughout the years, like last decades, of dumbing things down for the public, and I think that
Uh-huh.
that's definitely a step into the right direction of just letting people listen and learn at their own pace. I mean, for me, it took listening to John Vervaeke's series. I think I listened to it 3 or 4 times, and I'm
Wow.
still barely, and I spoke to him and I'm still barely like understanding some
Hmm.
of the parts to it. But I'm like, I feel like I'm at the edge oftentimes when I listen to him, or like when I
Hmm.
read books that he recommends. Um, I don't know if you know James Filler's book about uh, the relational worldview, and it's about like Heidegger as well. And
Mm.
it's just like this stuff that like people that have PhDs write in their philosophies, and
Yeah.
like as average people, we're like trying to like wrap
Hmm.
our heads around it. I'm always when I listen like on audiobooks. Like I think I'm grasping it. Could I teach it to another person? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Like at the edge of
Right.
understanding, and that's a very it's like an exploratory spot
Hmm.
to be in. But
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. For
I
sure.
think it's really cool that that's available for free.
Yeah. Yeah. I have books that, from recommendations from Peterson and Peugeot and Vervaeke, that like I categorically cannot listen to on audiobook because it would just go too
Yeah,
fast.
yeah,
Like I
yeah,
have to like take these in like small chunks and just kind of meditate on a page for a little bit and just,
yeah,
knowing that it's a process. It'll take me 20 years to get through this material, but
yeah.
then I'll understand it as opposed to just propositionally know it. That's not
That's
what I'm
true.
going for.
That's true. But there's a funny
Yeah.
thing too, maps of meaning where I heard Jordan recommend to listen to it on audio, and it's like more
Interesting.
understandable. Yeah, he was on Theo Vaughn's podcast, and he was like, maps, and like he's telling Theo Vaughn to listen to maps of meaning.
Yeah, yeah. He's like, oh,
Like
yeah,
he's
let me
gonna do
write that
it.
down.
But like, and then I did that. And I was like, oh, it's much more understandable. But I
That's
think that's like an
interesting.
exception there. Um,
Yeah, I'm gonna have to try that
yeah, it's
with
cool.
his book. Yeah.
Let me think. Anything else that I wanted to throw in there? I have like a really chaotic little.
Wow. You have a little maps of meaning on there.
I have little maps of meaning. I'm not a very creative person, but I like to do conversations like this because it like reflects the random or like the organic nature to them as opposed to.
For sure. Yep.
I wanted to ask you about the relationship between music and nature, and then perhaps music and reality. That's something that I think a lot about. Um, Very broad question, but if
Oh my gosh.
you want to try to tackle,
Um, music and nature.
yeah,
Um, wow. Well, let's talk about music and reality, and then we'll talk about nature.
yeah,
Maybe that's a better way to go. I don't know, for me at least. So Peugeot talks about this as like the music of the spheres, um, as kind of a concept that uh, reality has a pattern to it, and all of the patterns fit fractally into themselves, and are ordered towards something, an end. Um, and so that harmony of those patterns is kind of is a music. It is music because that's what music is. Music is layering of patterns, whether it's a kick pattern or a guitar rhythm. You know, you're layering all these elements so that they have a cohesion and a harmony to show that this thing now we call a song is a small fractal of reality itself.
yeah,
That your life can be a song. Reality for you can be musical, and that all of the elements that you're engaging with, for myself, my artistic endeavor, my business venture, my relationship with my wife, all of those are the instruments to this song I call life, and they have to be in harmony in order for the song to work. And sometimes one instrument needs tuning or a string breaks
yeah,
and
yeah.
you have to go and fix that and go clean your room and burn off the deadwood and revive that instrument and have it inform it how it should ought to play in the song. And then there's harmony again. Yeah. And so Christ is the ultimate conductor of that. Like that like there has to be this human embodied example, which is the conductor of the pattern that all the instruments are following. And that is your consciousness in reflection of Christ himself. That's how I see music.
That's amazing. Like, I'm gonna listen back to it. Like, I think you have the eloquence from the music as well. I think when people are able to just rap lyrics, That's
Yeah, yeah.
like I sometimes forget about that. Like when I hear a rap song that's quick, that
Uh-huh.
person can really speak. Like that's a extremely
Thanks.
high verbal
Yeah.
fluency.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
which I'll have to
Yeah.
listen again.
Yeah.
So
So as that relates to nature,
yeah.
like you were just talking about how, this conversation has an organic kind of randomness
Mhm.
to it. Um, I feel like nature is is kind of like an embodied pattern in that, like I use an example of a tree. I've been drawing trees recently, so I've been
Yeah.
contemplating them a lot. Um, Trees are fractals, but when you actually look at a tree, it's not like you can mathematically show where the original fractal pattern was and how it's all exactly mathematically
Yeah.
the same. It's
Yeah.
not. It's more organic and it
Yeah.
has a kind of randomness, but it's not random. It's
Mhm.
it's organized, right? Like
Mhm.
Vervaeke would talk about that organization, that yeah, it's like embodied pattern. And so I feel like there's a subtleness of the pattern that takes a little bit of a silencing of the mind to intuit of
Mhm.
like where these patterns are. And like you look at the sunrise and sunset and the moon come up, and you're kind of understanding that there's a flow to things.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like out there to discover, and it's kind of like the ultimate teacher of these bigger patterns, that you can kind of like, that's why they say like go out and touch grass, because it's like there's stuff there to intuit that's kind of beyond the propositional, that you can kind of get a flow for. um, yeah, it definitely informs the way I see the world, even see my faith. Obviously, like the idea of Christian revelation is that God comes down and reveals these patterns, reveals the way that we ought to worship. And so, but he reveals them, that the fact is that they were there from the foundation of the world.
Mm.
It's not like this new thing added. He's opening our eyes up to something that's already there, that we can now see again with fresh eyes.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I love that you're drawing trees. That's awesome. I think I saw one
Yeah.
on your Instagram probably.
Yeah, I think I posted one. Yeah, I've always wanted to draw trees. I never wanted to draw. I always wanted to draw trees. Like I don't like drawing as much as I like drawing trees. It's very strange.
That's very
Um,
interesting.
yeah, it's like it's a new artistic venture that I just started picking up in the last couple months, and I think it's like other than music, it's the only other like real artistic thing that I've done. And so it's like really speaking to me in a sense of like I feel like I'm learning things about my music creation from drawing, especially drawing with charcoal, in that um, like I'm having to layer different pressures of color gradients, or of darknesses and lightnesses, in order to get the appearance that sun is hitting this tree in a particular angle. And so you keep layering and layering and layering, and then it looks almost like this dark mess. But then you take the kneaded eraser and you kind of pull from it,
Yeah.
and then it starts to reveal itself as the way the light should have touched it. And that's like I get bogged down when I'm writing music. Sometimes I'll feel like I'm just adding all these layers. This is kind of a Rick Rubin thing too, where he talks about adding a bunch of layers on to kind of see what works and just kind of throw paint on the wall, but then you pull back and
Yeah.
kind of reduce it to its bare elements, and then you
Yeah.
see it for what it should be. And I feel like I'm learning that in a new dimension. I feel like I like traveled through a different dimension into
Yeah.
drawing to understand something deeper about music. Yeah, it's so wild.
Yes. Sometimes it takes that like zooming out and then applying to something else
Yeah.
to get the insight.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
really cool. Do you think that aliens are angels and demons?
Yeah. Short answer, yes.
I love that
Yeah.
that's a question I'm able to ask and then
Right. Yeah. This
answer.
is just people talking about it these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so
I
funny.
had this so last year at Christmas I did a podcast with my brother just in between the stuff. And then he tried to
Uh-huh.
explain to my sister's new boyfriend what we were talking about. So it's like, yeah, we're just
That's
talking about
hilarious.
demons. And this guy,
Uh-huh.
like, where
That's
did I
crazy.
find myself?
Yeah.
But yeah, you think so? You think they're
I
that's
think so. Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. It's either like a great deception of some sort, like, some organized thing that people are trying to pull a fast one on. Or or some spirits that are manifesting themselves. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to talk about
Yeah.
without sounding crazy. But yeah, like I mean, yeah. I sometimes I'll say things like that to my family and friends, and they'll kind of look at me sideways. But then I'll also say, like, by the way, I also think that, like, a cup has an angel to it. Like there's an angel of a cup, and that there's an angel of a city, and there's an angel of a town, there's an angel of my marriage. And so to say that there's like some sort of demonic influence, like of course, like
Yes.
I kind of see this at every level, and it's not a special thing that is coming from this higher level, and that there's some sort of conspiracy that is trying to deceive us. It's like, yeah, of course. Like, have you read the Bible?
Yeah.
Like, um, yeah. So it's kind of a whole worldview that when you say a particular part at a higher level, it sounds crazy, but it's like when you really break it down, we're always interacting with some sort of demonic or angelic influence.
Yeah. So can
Yeah.
you understand it as some sort of a higher identity that we're talking about?
Yes.
So
Right.
the angel of the cup, it's like
Yep.
the identity from above,
Yep.
something like that.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
That's
Or the spirit of a country. Like it
yeah.
seems like there's an influence that you can follow the best parts about America or follow the worst parts about America, and that would be called angelic influence or demonic influence. Um, and then that scales at every level.
Yeah.
Like all the worst parts about me and my wife and our personality clashes would be the demonic influence into our marriage or the angelic influence into our marriage, and how those things are supposed to have harmony. Yeah.
Cool. Anything specifically that you've been thinking about? I always have something that currently possesses me in a sense, like an idea or whatever, something I'm wrestling with. Anything for you that popped up recently?
Um, trees particularly have been I've been thinking about trees a lot. It's fall here, but so it's getting cold now. Finally, in North Carolina, it takes forever to start getting cool.
You like
Um,
it?
but yeah, I do. I grew up in the north,
Cool.
and so it was always cold. So I kind of like the cold. Yeah. I'm also that like introverted, like rainy, cloudy day is kind of like a vibe for me.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. I feel you.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I like when it gets cold. Um,
Does
yeah.
it
So
get
the
like
the color,
snow cold there? Like you get snow?
uh, it hasn't snowed in a while here.
Okay.
But when we moved back in 2003, yeah, it snowed like a foot or two, and I was like, oh, this is not bad. It's kind of like New York, like a little less snow, but
Yeah.
um, in the last couple of years, it's just been no snow,
Okay.
zero.
Yeah. Cool.
Um, but yeah, I've been thinking about trees and the coloring, the color changes of trees and how they just participate. Again, like we were saying, the relationship between nature and music. It seems like they participate in a grand pattern of like um, they're like going to sleep to be awakened in the spring. But like the light bearer is Christ, and that happens at Christmas, right at the winter equinox, the winter solstice. And so it's like, I don't know, I feel like since I've been drawing trees, I've been feeling like they've been alive and communicating to me that they're casting down their like golden crowns of glory and this like falling of the leaves, and they're about to go to sleep to like awaken to Christ bringing the light again for their renewal. And it's like I've been meditating on that for the last 2 months. Just as a concept, like how does that? I don't know what they're trying to say, but I'm hearing them say that to me. So
Yeah.
what does that mean?
Man, that's awesome. I really like. I'm gonna re-listen to this a couple times. It's no, but seriously, it's been illuminating to talk to you. Like
Yeah, thank you.
I find it really helpful how clear you answer questions.
Hmm,
And I will encourage anyone listening to find your music, whether that be the album you released on Spotify or if you need it for your business ventures,
for
to
sure.
find that stuff. And yeah, any last words you want to end on?
Yeah, I think that's all that's in my head right now. Yeah,
Mhm.
I appreciate this conversation. It was really good to talk to you.
Thank you, man. I love Young Christian Baxters. I'm really excited to see what else you bring out artistically, and I'll keep following your tree pictures and
For
thoughts.
sure.
Hopefully, we get
Yeah,
to do it again.
absolutely, man.
All right,
Yeah,
Matt.
thank you.
Have a nice day. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good week.
Yep, yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.